I went camping alone for the first time in late September, a few years back. I had the idea stuck in my head that I needed to disconnect, be out there with no service, no emails, no screens. I was living in the city at the time, and everything felt so loud all the time, the noise, the people, the lights. I wanted silence. I wanted to hear myself think again. I picked a patch of woods I read about in an online forum. It wasn't too far from a state park, but it was off-trail, rarely used, and from the satellite view it looked thick and wild. Perfect. I packed a basic setup: tent, sleeping bag, pad, stove, and some freeze-dried meals. I brought enough water to last the first day, then a filter to handle the rest. I kept things light. I was only going to be out there for 3 days, just a long weekend. I left early on a Friday morning, drove a couple hours into the countryside, parked at a turnout, then hiked in with my gear. I followed a game trail for about an hour before breaking off into thicker brush, cutting across a shallow stream, and climbing a small ridge where I found a relatively flat patch of forest floor surrounded by pine and oak. It was quiet. I mean, really quiet. I could hear every bird call, every branch shift, every insect skittering through the leaf litter. It was exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent, hung my food in a dry bag high off a tree branch, and settled in. By dusk, I was sitting on a flat rock with a steaming cup of instant noodles in one hand and a spoon in the other, listening to the wind press through the treetops. The first night went smoothly. It got cold, colder than I expected, and I had to stuff some clothes into the bottom of my sleeping bag to keep my toes warm. But I slept through most of it. A few animal sounds here and there, an owl hooting, some rustling not far off, but nothing out of the ordinary. The next day I did some light exploring, nothing too intense. Walked in a wide loop around my camp, marked some trees with tape so I wouldn't get turned around. I saw deer tracks, some fox scat, a few small piles of what might have been raccoon droppings. Normal stuff. The air was fresh, the sun filtered through the canopy just right, and for once my mind was still. Late that afternoon, I cooked another freeze-dried dinner and watched the sky darken. I read for a while using my headlamp, then shut it all down when I started getting sleepy. The woods were silent again, just the occasional gust, the far-off snap of a branch, but nothing that made my heart race. Then at around 3 in the morning, I woke up needing to pee. That always happens to me when I camp. I try not to drink water too late in the evening, but it never matters. Something about being outside, I guess. My body gets confused. Anyway, I tried to ignore it, shifting around, trying to fall back asleep, but it got worse. Eventually, I gave in. I unzipped the tent carefully and stepped out into the cold. The air had that biting edge, not quite freezing, but close. I had on long underwear and a hoodie, and I slipped my boots on without lacing them. I grabbed my headlamp and turned it on, sweeping the light around the trees, just to be sure I wasn't walking right into something's path. All clear. I walked maybe 20 yards away from the tent, down a little slope so I wouldn't have to deal with the smell later. I found a flat spot behind a big fallen log and crouched down. Everything was still, just the forest, the dark, and me trying to pee without freezing. That's when I felt it. Not a sound, not yet, just the sensation that I wasn't alone. That weird tightening in the gut, like your body knows something before your brain figures it out. I paused, looked up. There, in the beam of my headlamp, about 15 feet away, was a cow. At first, I didn't quite register what I was looking at. It was so out of place, big, blocky, and still, just standing there. Its eyes reflected the light like glass. I swear to God, it was staring directly at me, not blinking, not moving, just me, mid-pee, and this giant cow watching me like it had just caught me breaking into its house. It didn't make a sound, no snort, no hoof step. It just stood there, head slightly tilted, ears forward. I stared back, frozen, not even finishing the job. My thighs started to burn from squatting too long, but I didn't dare move. Eventually, I straightened up slowly and backed away, not turning my back to it. The cow stayed put, like it didn't even care that I was there. Or maybe it cared too much. I wasn't sure. When I got back to the tent, I peeked out one last time before zipping it shut. The cow was still there, still watching, The rest of the night, I lay stiff in my bag, listening. No footsteps, no lowing, no rustling. But I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the stare down, the cold eyes, the way it didn't blink. By morning, it was gone. I checked the area. No hoof prints, but the ground was dry and covered in pine needles, so that wasn't surprising. I chalked it up to some escaped livestock. Maybe a farm nearby had lost track of one. It was weird, but not supernatural. Still, it messed with my head. A cow doesn't belong in dense woods like that. At least not alone. The rest of the day, I tried to enjoy myself. Went on a short hike, made some notes in my journal, took a few pictures of the trees and rocks, but something was off. I kept thinking about the cow, the way it stared, the way it didn't act like an animal, more like a guard, like I'd trespassed somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. That night, I set up a perimeter of sticks around the tent. A little childish, maybe, but it gave me some peace of mind. If anything walked up, I'd hear it. I didn't plan on needing to pee again. I told myself I'd hold it, but nature doesn't care what we plan. Around 2:30, the urge hit again. Not as bad as the night before, but still enough that I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep through it. I got out, boots on this time, and stayed closer to the tent. I didn't go down the slope. I just stepped behind a tree and got it over with. When I turned my light back on and swept the woods, my stomach dropped. 2 cows this time, standing side by side, 20 feet away, staring. Again, no movement, no sound, just eyes. I backed into the tent so fast I ripped one of the zippers, climbed in and just sat there, heart pounding. Who the hell has cows wandering deep in the woods? What are they even doing out here? The rest of the night I stayed awake, listening. I didn't hear anything walk off. No chewing, no grunting, just silence. When morning came, I opened the tent and looked around. They were gone. Again, not a trace. That was enough. I packed everything, didn't even eat breakfast. I hoofed it straight out the way I came, moving fast. Every now and then I stopped, listened, scanned the trees. Nothing, but the feeling never left, like I was being watched. Back at the car, I loaded my stuff in record time and didn't look back. I drove until I got service again, then checked for any news about missing cattle. Nothing. No reports, no farm bulletins, no strange sightings. I tried to laugh it off to myself later. Just some rogue cows. Maybe they escaped. Maybe they were used to people and curious. Maybe it was nothing. But I've never been stared down like that before. Never felt so judged in the middle of a pee. And I swear to God, those cows knew exactly what they were doing. I don't camp alone anymore, and every time I pass a field full of cows, I check to see if any are watching me just a little too closely. Some of them do, and when they do, I get the hell out of there. I had been watching that old movie again, the one with Stallone wandering through the woods like a broken man. There was something about his eyes in that film, the way they held this weight, this quiet sadness. He didn't have to say much, and he didn't. That silence said more than words ever could. Maybe that's what stuck with me, the silence, the loneliness, the heaviness of it all. I'd been feeling that way for a while myself. Not for the same reasons, maybe, but that doesn't really matter. Hurt is hurt. So when I packed my gear and left the city, I wasn't going out there to relax or to find peace. I was going because I didn't know what else to do. I needed to get away from people, from noise, from my own head. I picked a forested stretch of land I found in a back corner of a forum. No name, no campsites, just trees, rivers, and time. I loaded my truck with the basics: tent, sleeping bag, tarp, food, small gas burner, water jugs, 2 knives, a fire starter, some clothes, a basic first aid kit. I didn't take a gun. I didn't want to feel like I was preparing for war. I brought a couple of books I knew I wouldn't read, a few notebooks and pens. I figured I might write something. Maybe that would help. I drove 6 hours out, the last 2 on dirt roads that got worse with every mile. By the time I stopped, the road had narrowed to a path barely wider than my truck. I parked where I could, off the track, and loaded my pack. It was heavy but manageable. I hiked in for over an hour, following no trail, just going by instinct and the sun. The deeper I went, the better I felt. The pressure in my chest started to ease. I saw deer tracks, heard birds. I smelled pine and damp earth. It was something real, something I could trust. I found a flat patch between some thick trees near a dry creek bed. It looked like no one had been through there in a long time. I cleared a spot, set up the tent, and hung the tarp for shade. I got a small fire going with the burner, made some instant rice and beans, and sat there eating with a plastic spoon. I wasn't hungry, but it felt good to do something basic, something practical. That night, I sat outside and listened to the woods. It was quiet, but not in a dead way. There was wind and leaves brushing against each other. I heard something moving now and then, animals probably. I lay in my tent and stared at the nylon ceiling for hours. I slept a little, not well, but enough. The next day I walked. I left camp behind and just moved through the woods, not fast, not in any particular direction. I stepped over fallen logs, followed the bend of the creek bed, watched birds hop through the branches. I didn't think much. That was the point. At one point, I saw a fox watching me from between two trees. It didn't run. It just stood there looking. Then it turned and slipped into the underbrush. I walked until I was tired and made my way back to camp. I cooked again, something simple, and sat staring at the fire until it burned low. The wind picked up that night. I could hear it whistling through the branches. I zipped up the tent tight and curled into my bag. I thought about Stallone again, that look in his eyes, that quiet wait, that tiredness. I knew it too well. The third day, something changed. I noticed it first when I went to refill my water from a nearby stream. There were tracks near the bank. Not deer, not bear, boots, human, one set, fresh, maybe a day old. I crouched down and looked at them closely. The tread was worn smooth, old boots, heavy steps. I stood there for a while just looking. The hair on the back of my neck started to rise. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here. Not this deep, not this far off the map. It didn't make sense. I backed off and returned to camp. I looked around, checked my gear. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. But I started to feel that pressure again. That weight in my chest. Like someone was watching. I sat with my back to a tree and didn't move for a long time. The air felt different. Still, heavy. I stayed up all night, barely blinking, barely breathing. I kept the fire going. I held one of the knives in my hand. I listened. I heard something moving once, maybe 100 feet out. Slow, deliberate. It didn't come closer, but it didn't move away for a long time either. In the morning, I found something. A scrap of old cloth stuck to a branch. Faded green. Military, maybe. It was torn, frayed at the edges. I held it for a while, just staring. Then I tucked it into my pocket and packed my things. I didn't want to be there anymore. I moved camp. I didn't go far, just far enough to feel like I had done something. I didn't want to run, but I didn't want to stay still either. I set up. I don't like thinking about that weekend, but sometimes it creeps back in whether I want it to or not. It's not the kind of memory that sits quietly in the back of your mind. It's the kind that forces its way to the front when things get too quiet. Like when I'm out in the yard by myself, or driving through empty stretches of highway surrounded by trees. That's when it happens. My brain pulls it back up like a bad habit. Started as a plan to get away for a few days, just to clear my head. Work had been rough. Long hours, too many meetings, the kind of stress that stacks up until you start to feel like you're walking around with a backpack full of bricks. I was burnt out. A buddy of mine had told me about this place he used to camp at years ago, tucked away off an old logging road way up in northern Maine. Said it was quiet, never busy, and surrounded by forest in every direction. It sounded perfect. I prepped for a solo trip. I wasn't new to camping, though I wouldn't call myself an expert either. I knew the basics, how to set up a tent, cook over a fire, pack light but smart. I brought what I figured I'd need. A good knife, a camp stove, sleeping bag, water filtration gear, bear spray just in case, and enough food for 4 days. I double-checked the forecast, no rain, just cool nights and clear skies. I even printed a topo map and marked the spot where I planned to camp, about 3 miles off a narrow dirt road that itself was about an hour from the nearest town. The drive was quiet. Once I got off the paved roads, I didn't see another car for miles, just pines and dirt. The deeper I went, the more I started to feel the silence. Not just quiet like no traffic, but deep silence. The kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I found the old logging road my buddy had mentioned. It was barely more than a path now, 2 ruts cut through weeds and overgrown brush. I parked my truck under some tall trees, pulled my pack from the bed, locked everything up, and started hiking in. The trail was faint, but it was there. My boots crunched through dead leaves and twigs. Birds flitted between branches above me, and shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy in places. It was peaceful, like stepping into another world. I followed the terrain gently downhill until I reached a low valley near a stream. That's where I set up camp. I picked a flat patch of ground a few hundred feet from the water and cleared away debris from my tent. Once it was up and staked down, I gathered some dry wood, lit a small fire, and made dinner, just a simple freeze-dried meal and tea. That first night was calm. The stars were clearer than I'd seen in a long time. No city lights, no distant hum of traffic, just the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I fell asleep quickly, wrapped in my sleeping bag with the faint smell of smoke on my clothes. The next morning, I woke early. My body clock always shifts when I'm out in the woods. No alarms, just the light. I boiled water for coffee and sat on a log, staring out into the trees while the sky turned pale blue. I spent most of the day exploring. The stream curved off into a thick patch of cedar, and I followed it for a while, snapping photos and marking my route with bits of ribbon tied to branches, just in case I lost track. It was on the way back that I noticed the first weird thing. One of the ribbons I'd tied was missing. I know I put it there. I double-checked those kinds of things. I figured maybe it had fallen or gotten blown off. That seemed reasonable. But then I found the next one, and it was tied around a rock on the ground, not the branch I'd left it on. That made less sense. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe I tied it badly and it slipped down. By the time I got back to camp, the sun was low. I made another fire and cooked, then sat for a while just listening. That night was colder. I pulled my sleeping bag tight and drifted off, but not as easily as the night before. Something felt different. It wasn't loud, exactly. More like the quiet had a weight to it, like the woods were holding their breath. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that did it, just a sudden jolt of awareness, like my brain telling me something wasn't right. I lay there still, listening. Nothing, just the distant sound of water trickling. Then a soft crunch. Not close, but not far either. Leaves, underfoot. One footstep, then another. Slow, measured. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on inside the tent. The beam lit up the nylon walls, and for a second I thought about unzipping the door to look. But I didn't. I stayed still and waited. After a while, the sound stopped. No more steps. I lay there, wide awake for over an hour, then drifted back into light, restless sleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. No tracks, no broken branches. I tried to tell myself it was a deer, a raccoon maybe, but I kept scanning the woods anyway. I boiled water, ate, and tried to shake the unease. That third day, I stayed closer to camp. I chopped some wood, filtered water, and walked short loops, always within earshot of the stream. Around mid-afternoon, I found something that stopped me cold. A small pile of rocks, maybe 10 feet from my camp. They hadn't been there before. 5 stones stacked neatly about a foot high. Not natural. No way. I stared at it for a long time. My heart started thudding. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't just weird, it was deliberate. Someone had been here. I hadn't heard a car, hadn't seen anyone. But someone had come into my camp and done that while I was out. I knocked the pile over and packed up everything I had. I didn't want to be there anymore. The woods didn't feel peaceful now. They felt tight and watchful. I hiked back up the trail toward my truck, checking behind me way more than I should have needed to. When I got to the spot where I'd parked, my stomach dropped. The truck was still there, but the back was open. I hadn't left it open. I remember locking it. I stood there for a minute, frozen. Then I approached, slowly, like something might leap out. The tailgate was down and some of my gear was gone. An extra sleeping bag, a hatchet, one of my water jugs. But more than that, someone had been through my things. The glove box was open, stuff scattered on the seat. A faint smell, like sweat and dirt, hung in the air. Whoever it was had spent time here. I didn't think. I just threw my pack in and slammed the tailgate. I turned the key, started the engine, and drove, fast. The truck bounced down the dirt road as I tried to put distance between me and whatever that had been. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Then I pulled over and sat there shaking for a long time. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That someone had moved a ribbon and stacked some rocks? That I heard footsteps? I had no proof, just a feeling in my gut and some missing gear. But I never went back. Weeks later, I was still thinking about it. I kept replaying every little detail, trying to make sense of it. But it didn't make sense. And then one night, I was going through the photos on my phone, the ones I'd taken by the stream, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of one shot, half hidden behind a tree, there was a figure. Far back, blurry. But it was there. Just a human shape. No detail. But it hadn't moved. I checked the other pictures taken seconds apart. It was in all of them. Same spot, same posture, watching. That's when I realized that it hadn't started the third night, or even the second. It had started from the beginning. Someone had been out there the whole time. I had been planning a solo camping trip for a while. I wanted to go somewhere remote, away from the city noise, away from the crowds. I looked at a few places online and found a spot deep in a forest about 5 hours from where I lived. It wasn't a designated campground or anything. It was just a patch of land near a lake, reachable only by hiking a few miles through an unmarked trail. A few people had posted about it in forums, saying it was peaceful and beautiful, but also that you had to be careful. No cell signal, no one else around, just you in the woods. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed my gear, made sure I had enough food and water for 3 days, brought a small camping stove, some dry rations, a first aid kit, a flashlight, extra batteries, a knife, a map, and a compass. I also carried a power bank for my phone, even though I didn't expect to use it much. I took my time preparing everything because I didn't want to forget anything essential. I told my brother where I was going and when I planned to return. He wasn't too thrilled with the idea, but he knew I liked this kind of stuff. I started the hike early in the morning. The weather was nice. Cool air, blue skies. The trail was rough and barely visible, but I had a good sense of direction and I kept checking my map to stay on course. It took me about 2.5 hours to reach the spot. It was perfect. There was a small clearing near the lake, surrounded by tall trees. The water was calm, and I could hear birds and the occasional splash of fish. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, and just sat there for a while, taking it all in. It felt like I was the only person in the world. The first day went smoothly. I explored a bit, made some instant noodles, and watched the sun go down over the lake. It got colder after dark, but I had warm clothes and a good sleeping bag. I lay in my tent that night listening to the sounds of the forest. Owls hooting, leaves rustling, the wind moving through the trees. It was peaceful, and I slept better than I thought I would. The second day was when things started to feel strange. I went for a walk in the morning, just following a game trail along the lake. I saw some deer tracks and maybe raccoon or something. Nothing unusual. But then I found a boot. Just one. An old, worn-out hiking boot lying by the side of the trail. It was covered in dirt and had clearly been there a while. It looked out of place, like someone had just taken it off and left it. I looked around to see if there were any other signs of people. Bags, clothes, wrappers, anything. But there was nothing, just that boot. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a minute, then turned around and went back to my campsite. I tried to shake it off. People lose things in the woods all the time. Maybe someone had a hole in their pack and didn't notice it fell out. But the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. It wasn't near any trailhead. It wasn't even close to a main path. And why just one boot? That afternoon, I decided to stay closer to camp. I fished a little, read a book I brought, and tried not to think about the boot. As the sun went down, I felt a weird kind of tension in the air. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no frogs, nothing. Just silence. I tried to dismiss it. Sometimes animals go quiet when the weather's about to change. Maybe a predator was nearby, but still, it made me uneasy. That night, I heard something. Around midnight, I was half asleep when I heard footsteps. Not animals, not raccoons or deer. Heavy, slow footsteps. I stayed completely still. My tent was zipped up, and I couldn't see outside, but I could hear it. The steps moved around my campsite. I didn't have a gun with me, just a knife. I held it tightly and listened. Whoever it was, or whatever it was, didn't say anything. They just walked around for a while. Then they stopped. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid they could hear it. After a while, the steps faded away. I waited at least another hour before I moved. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sun came up, I finally stepped out of the tent. Nothing was missing. Nothing was touched. But there were footprints. Human footprints. Bare feet. The prints went in a circle around my tent and then off into the woods. No shoes. No signs of camping gear. Just bare feet. I should have packed up and left right then. But I didn't. I told myself maybe someone else was out there. Maybe a weirdo living in the woods or something. I didn't want to panic. I had one more night planned. I figured I'd keep a fire going all night and just stay alert. I didn't go far from the tent that day. I gathered more wood than I needed, enough to keep the fire going strong until morning. I sharpened a couple of sticks, not that it would do much, but it made me feel better. I kept my knife close. I kept looking over my shoulder. As the sun set, I lit the fire and sat next to it. I didn't read. I didn't eat much. I just watched the woods. Hours went by. The fire crackled. The wind blew. Every now and then I thought I saw movement in the trees, but I couldn't be sure. I was jumpy, exhausted, and every sound made me flinch. Sometime after midnight, I saw someone. Across the lake, maybe 50 yards away, there was a figure standing between the trees. No light, no sound, just standing. I stared at it, trying to figure out if it was really a person or just a shadow. But it didn't move like a shadow. It shifted slightly, like it was watching me. I stood up slowly, gripping my knife. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there. The figure didn't move closer. It just stayed there. I kept the fire going, throwing on more wood, trying to make the flames higher. I wanted light. I wanted them to know I saw them, but they didn't move. Eventually, the figure slipped back into the woods. I didn't sleep. I sat there until dawn, knife in hand, fire crackling, eyes on the trees. When morning came, I didn't pack carefully. I shoved everything into my pack, grabbed my gear, and started hiking out. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I barely drank water. I just moved. Every now and then, I looked behind me, convinced I'd see someone following me, but I didn't. I made it back to my car by early afternoon. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without stopping. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just said I cut the trip short because of the weather. I still don't know what I saw. I still don't know who was out there. Maybe it was just a homeless person. Maybe it was someone else camping and being weird. But the bare feet, the silence, the way they just watched. I've never felt that kind of fear before. I haven't gone camping since, and I don't think I ever will. I don't know if it was the scariest trip of my life, but it was definitely the most intense. Every single day, something happened that made us stop, recalculate, and just hope we'd come out of it okay. And somehow, even though it was terrifying in stretches, it's still one of the best camping trips I've ever had. It was just the two of us, my husband and me, backpacking in the Tetons late in the season, trying to squeeze in one more trip before winter closed things down. We knew the weather could turn quickly that time of year, but we didn't expect what we got. We started in fairly dry conditions. It had been a hot, dusty summer, and even by the time we set off in late September, the trails were parched. We followed the South Fork Cascade Trail in and planned to loop around Death Canyon Shelf and come back over Static Peak Divide. It's not the easiest loop, especially with elevation and exposure, but we were prepared. Or at least we thought we were. The first day was straightforward enough. Sunny skies, hardly any clouds. A bit of a breeze that cooled things down when we hit the inclines. But it was hot, probably 90 degrees or close to it, especially with the sun beating down on us above tree line. We drank water regularly, tried to pace ourselves, and watched the map closely to stay on track. By late afternoon, we were coming up to the pass above the tree line, a narrow saddle with exposure on both sides. That's when my husband started to get really jumpy. A few wispy clouds had started to gather on the horizon, nothing huge, but he has this deeply rooted fear of lightning, and for good reason. We both know it's one of the most dangerous elements to deal with out in the open. He was carrying the heavier pack too, which was making him sweat even more, and the heat wasn't helping. Still, the speed he was pushing us at was rough. He stopped talking, just charged ahead, muttering to himself under his breath. I could tell he was getting into that headspace where all you can think about is getting out of danger. He was overheating. He wasn't drinking enough. When we passed the first stream marked on the map and found it bone dry, I saw his face change. Panic, not just from the clouds, but from realizing he had maybe a sip left in his bottle. The second stream, nothing. The third, a dry trench. He started wobbling a little on the trail. We checked the map again and saw one more blue line, a bolder one, about a mile ahead. I told him to stop and rest while I went for it. He sat down on a rock in the shade of a boulder, breathing heavy, shoulders slumped. We took off his pack, and I told him not to move. I took both bottles and headed forward, moving quickly but staying alert. I found the stream about 20 minutes later. It wasn't big, but it was flowing. Clear, cold, fast-moving water trickling through the rocks. I filled both bottles and crouched down to start filtering. The sun was warm on my back. I was about 20 feet from the edge of the stream when I noticed movement. A small brown head popped up from the brush on the other side. Then another, and then a third. Cubs. I stood up slowly. My heart just dropped. There's no mistaking the shape of a grizzly cub's head. Those rounded ears, the snout, the color. And if there are cubs, the mother is always near. Sure enough, I spotted her next. She rose slowly behind them, her head above the shrubs, sniffing the air. I could hear her breathing. I don't know if she saw me first or smelled me. I don't even remember exactly what I did first. Just that I stood tall, kept the filter in one hand, and slowly raised the other. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just said, loudly, firmly, "Hey bear," and waved my arms. My legs were shaking. My mouth went dry. She froze. She looked at me, then at the cubs, and I saw that moment of calculation in her posture. She could have run. She could have charged. She did neither. She just watched me. I backed up slowly, still talking out loud, walking backward up the slope away from the water. After a few seconds that felt like a full hour, she nudged her cubs, turned, and moved off into the brush. I stood there, heart racing, barely breathing, and waited until I was sure they were gone. Then I turned and walked quickly but quietly back to where I'd left my husband. He was half asleep, dizzy, but he perked up when I handed him the water. I didn't tell him about the bear until much later. That night, we camped on Death Canyon Shelf. The views are incredible from up there, especially at sunset. The kind of wide, endless view that reminds you how small you are. We made a quick dinner, sat watching the last light fade, then crawled into the tent. That's when the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped. Then the thunder started. Far off at first, then closer, then almost directly overhead. Lightning lit up the sky like a strobe light, and the thunder cracked so hard it shook the ground. We could smell ozone through the tent walls, that metallic, sharp scent like burned wires. The tent glowed with each flash. We both sat upright. The storm was right on top of us. No trees, no rocks, no cover. We were the tallest thing on the ridge. We crouched in the center of the tent, trying to reduce contact with the ground. Sitting on our pads, huddled up, packs away from us, trying not to touch the tent poles. Every flash lit us up in white. I counted between lightning and thunder, sometimes not even 1 second. Then it started to snow. Not gently, not slowly. It came down in sheets, and it was the heaviest snow I'd ever seen drop so fast. We couldn't even hear it over the wind and thunder, but it collected quickly. The air got heavier, colder. Our breath steamed. The floor of the tent grew colder by the minute. And then, just like that, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost louder than the storm. We unzipped the tent, thinking something had caught fire. Everything was glowing white. It was so bright outside, I thought the forest was burning. But it wasn't fire. It was snow. Nearly 4 inches of fresh powder in under half an hour. The storm had dumped it and vanished. We brushed snow off the tent, zipped back up, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Neither of us slept much that night. The fear didn't come from one thing, it was the accumulation. The heat, the lightning, the snow, the bear, all of it. It didn't feel like we were unwelcome in the wilderness. It felt like we were just barely tolerated. And still, we kept going. The next morning was blue skies again, cold but clear. The snow started melting almost immediately under the sun. We broke camp, hiked on, and made our way towards Static Peak Divide. That day brought hail. Out of nowhere, just as we were scrambling up a steep incline, it started to pelt us. Marble-sized ice, hammering our jackets, stinging our arms. We ducked behind rocks, waited it out, then pushed forward. I remember wondering if it would ever stop, if we'd get a single day on that trip without some kind of danger. But even with all of it, the trail was beautiful. Wildflowers pushing up through the snowmelt, marmots watching us from boulders, the quiet peace of the mountains after a storm. We didn't see another hiker for nearly 3 days. We made it out safely. We crossed back over the divide, dropped into the lower canyons, and eventually reached the trailhead. By the time we got to the car, my knees were sore, my fingers were numb, and I was more exhausted than I'd been in years. But it was worth it. We talk about that trip more than any other. Not because it was perfect, not because it went smoothly, but because it reminded us what real risk feels like. It reminded us that being out there isn't just about pretty views and solitude. It's about facing what nature throws at you one moment at a time and realizing how little control you really have. It made us careful. It made us slower. It made us respect every sound, every shift in the clouds, every empty stream bed. And that kind of fear, the kind that comes from real things, storms, animals, the limits of your own body, that sticks with you. Not like a trauma, but like a scar. Something that teaches you, something you carry. It was the best trip I've ever been on, and it scared the hell out of me. I was camping in the woods one weekend. It was one of those last-minute decisions where the need to get away from everything suddenly hits hard. I'd had a long week at work, staring at a screen all day, dealing with noise, city traffic, constant phone notifications. I needed quiet. I needed to be alone. I loaded up my pack Friday evening with just the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, food, a small stove, a water filter, some basic gear, and drove out toward the national forest a few hours away. No real plan. I just parked my truck at a known trailhead, hiked in about 5 miles, and set up camp in a spot I'd used once a couple of years ago. It wasn't anything special, just a little clearing down near a bend in a shallow creek. Trees surrounded it on all sides, and the slope of the land gave it a natural windbreak. The trail I came in on wasn't marked or popular, mostly just a wildlife path I remembered following before. It was peaceful, far enough off the beaten path that I hadn't seen anyone on the hike in. I didn't even hear anything man-made for the rest of the day after I got there. Just wind in the trees, the soft current of the creek, birds up high, occasional rustles in the underbrush. I cooked up a simple meal that night, read a bit by my headlamp, then crawled into my tent around 9. It got cold that night. I brought a decent bag, but I woke up a few times needing to adjust, curl tighter, pull my hat lower. It must have dropped close to freezing by dawn. When the sky started to lighten, I gave up on sleep and unzipped the tent flap to a gray, quiet morning. Everything was still. No breeze, just damp leaves and the soft gurgle of the creek. I sat up slowly, still in my bag, taking it all in before I decided to get up and make some tea. That's when I noticed it. next to the fire pit. I hadn't even touched it yet. There was a cup, not mine, a stainless steel mug, sitting on a flat rock I'd used before to hold gear. It was positioned carefully, not tipped or haphazard, just sitting there. Inside it, I could see dark liquid tea probably, still warm enough to steam slightly in the cold air. It wasn't full. Someone had taken a few sips, then left it. I froze. My body didn't move, but my thoughts started racing. I hadn't heard anything in the night. Nothing. I'm a light sleeper when I camp solo, always have been. Every little sound usually wakes me. But someone had been close enough to my tent, close enough to sit by my fire ring and drink tea, without making a sound. I stayed still for a long time, scanning the tree line, straining my ears. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no voices, just birds far off, starting to come to life with the morning. I slowly reached for my knife, which I always kept in a loop on my sleeping pad. Felt small in my hand. I didn't know what I was expecting to do with it. Eventually, I crawled out of the tent. I walked over to the cup and crouched beside it. I didn't touch it. I just stared. It was scratched up a bit, old but clean. No logo or markings. It wasn't mine. I looked for tracks in the dirt, but the ground was too hard and leaf-covered. Nothing clear. The fire pit still looked undisturbed. No fresh ashes, no signs of it being lit. So where had the tea come from? A small camp stove? Did someone sit here silently while I slept, just feet away? I stood up and turned in a slow circle. Nothing but trees. No smoke, no sounds, no movement. I packed up fast. Threw everything in my pack, not caring about organizing. My food bag was still tied in a tree a little ways off, untouched as far as I could tell. I cut it down quickly and lashed it to my pack. Every sound in the forest now felt deliberate. Every twig snap, every bird call. I kept glancing behind me. I started hiking back out. I didn't take any breaks. I didn't eat. I drank water as I walked and kept my knife in hand the whole time. The forest felt different now, heavy somehow, like it was watching. I knew it was irrational, probably, but something had happened that didn't fit. I got to the truck just after 10. No one was parked near me. No sign that anyone else had been there. I loaded up, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. I didn't calm down until I was well onto the highway. When I got home, I kept thinking about the cup, how close someone must have gotten, how quiet they had to be, why they didn't wake me, why they didn't take anything or leave a mess, why they made tea, why they drank only part of it. The weirdest part wasn't even the cup itself. It was that feeling I had after, that sense of being watched, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like someone had decided I needed to know I wasn't alone out there, but didn't want to say it with words or confrontation. I told myself it was just a hunter, maybe someone moving through, saw my camp, decided to stop for a rest without meaning harm. Maybe they saw my tent and thought I was already awake. Maybe they made tea for themselves quietly and didn't think much of it. Maybe they left when they realized I was still sleeping. But the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. Who does that? Who walks up to a solo camp, sits silently, makes a drink, then leaves without a trace? No hello, no footprints, no gear, no sound? I cleaned all my gear that night, folded my tent carefully, stowed it in the garage. I didn't touch it for weeks. The next weekend, I checked online forums for any news about odd activity in the area. Nothing. No missing people. No suspicious sightings. No chatter about strange campsites. It was like it had never happened. A few weeks later, I talked to a guy I know who used to do trail maintenance in that region. I mentioned the cup vaguely, not wanting to sound too paranoid. He just frowned and said sometimes people live out there. Not campers, not hikers, just people. Off-grid types. They move through, stay quiet, avoid attention. Some are harmless, some aren't. I haven't gone back to that spot since. I still camp, but never alone anymore. And I check everything in the morning. Every detail, every scrap of evidence. I listen more carefully now. I don't wear earplugs. I don't bury myself in a sleeping bag so tight I can't move fast. That trip changed something in me. Not in a dramatic way, There were no attacks, no dramatic chases through the woods, but in a quiet, persistent way. The kind of change that lingers in your gut, that makes you second-guess stillness, that makes you notice when a sound is missing. It's easy to feel safe in the woods when it's just trees and wind. But once you realize someone might be there with you, someone who doesn't want to be seen, someone who leaves no trace but a half-finished cup of tea, you start to understand just how vulnerable you really are out there. And that kind of fear doesn't leave. It stays with you like a shadow, quiet but constant. I've been needing a break for a while. Work had been draining me, and my friend Matt felt the same way. We'd been talking about taking a weekend to disconnect for months, and we finally pinned down a date in early October. The weather was cooling off, but not yet cold. The leaves in Georgia were just starting to change, which made it a good time to get into the woods. We didn't want a state park or any big organized campground. We were both looking for something a little more off the grid. No phone service, no crowds, just woods, a fire, and a couple nights away from everything. We picked a spot in North Georgia that Matt had heard about from a guy he knew through work. He said it was pretty remote, not far from the edge of a national forest, and there was an old logging road you could take in with four-wheel drive. Matt had a Jeep, so that was fine. We figured we'd drive in Friday evening, get the tent up before dark, hang out Saturday, and drive back Sunday afternoon. The plan was to stock up on food, water, and whatever else we needed on the way in. So we left Atlanta around noon Friday, took our time driving north, stopped at a few scenic pull-offs, and by the time we got to the town near our campsite, it was already late afternoon. It was a small town, the kind with one gas station, a diner, and not much else. The grocery store looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, with wood paneling on the outside and one of those old swinging signs that creaked a little when the wind hit it. Inside, it was quiet. Dim fluorescent lights, linoleum floors that had yellowed with age, and about 5 aisles total. We grabbed a couple frozen burritos, chips, a pack of hot dogs, and stuff to make sandwiches. Then we headed toward the coolers in the back to grab beer, only to find that they were all empty. Not like recently stocked and already sold out, just straight up empty. No bottles, no cans, no price tags, nothing. We looked around for a sign and saw one taped to the glass that said, Dry County. Neither of us had even thought about that. It wasn't something we expected in 2023, but sure enough, this little pocket of North Georgia didn't sell alcohol anywhere. We stood there for a second, trying to figure out what to do. It wasn't a deal breaker, but we had been looking forward to sitting by the fire with a few beers. So when we went up front to pay, we asked the cashier if there was a place nearby that did sell. She looked like she had worked there forever. Older woman, slow-moving, soft-spoken, and she told us that if we drove just 10 minutes down the road toward the county line, we'd find a bar that was across the line and could legally sell. She even gave us rough directions: left out of the lot, follow the road through the bend, look for the dirt turnoff with a rusted gate, go past that, and it would be a building with a red roof on the right. We thanked her, took our bags, and headed out. We joked a little on the way, saying we should have brought our own from the city, how it felt like stepping into the past. Still, we figured a quick stop at a bar wouldn't hurt. We'd each have one or two, stretch our legs, and then hit the woods before it got too dark. As we followed the directions, things started feeling a little different. The road was narrow, winding through thick woods, with almost no houses or businesses. There were long stretches where the trees formed a canopy overhead, and the sunlight barely made it through. We passed the rusted gate the woman mentioned, a big old farm-style thing that looked like it hadn't opened in years. Then a half-mile past it, sure enough, we saw a building with a red roof on the right. Only it didn't look like a bar. The place had no signs, not even a Bud Light neon or a wooden plaque. The windows were completely bricked up, not boarded but actual concrete blocks, like someone had sealed the place shut. There was a screen door at the front with a single light bulb above it, the kind with a chain pull, and it was the only source of light anywhere nearby. The building looked like it had once been a house or a small store, but it was hard to say what it was now. The parking area wasn't even gravel, just packed dirt with a couple of tire tracks leading up to it. We pulled up and sat there for a second, engine still running. It was getting dark, and the sky had that deep orange glow that only lasts a few minutes before full night. I remember how quiet it was, No cars, no voices, not even insects. Just stillness. Matt laughed a little and made a joke about deliverance, which I was thinking too. Then we sat there longer than we needed to, not saying much. Something about the place just felt wrong. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. We never even opened the doors. After maybe 2 minutes of sitting in silence, both of us just sort of agreed without speaking that we didn't need beer that badly. Matt put the Jeep in reverse and backed out slow, like we didn't want to call attention to ourselves even though no one was around. We got back on the road. Didn't say much until we were well past the gate and back near the grocery store. Then we started making more jokes about moonshine stills, trapdoors, and whatever else to ease the tension. But it was nervous joking, not the fun kind. We drove to the site after that. The old logging road was rough but manageable. About 2 miles in, we found the clearing Matt had marked on the GPS, and we set up camp just before night fully settled in. We got a small fire going, cooked a couple hot dogs on sticks, and tried to just enjoy the woods. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that building. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look like a bar either. It looked like the kind of place where people did things they didn't want anyone to see. That night, I barely slept. Every crack of a stick outside the tent made me flinch. I told myself it was animals, maybe wind, but I just couldn't shake the feeling we'd come too close to something we weren't supposed to see. In the morning, we both looked tired. We made some instant coffee on the camp stove, sat in the early chill, and didn't talk much about the night before. Later that day, a few more campers came in. It wasn't a big site, but it had room for a few tents, and apparently it was known among some locals. They seemed nice enough, all from the nearby area, just up for a weekend of hunting or hiking. We started talking with one guy while we were all gathering dead branches for the fire. Eventually, the topic came around to us being from Atlanta and how we tried to find a bar on the way in. We mentioned the place we'd been directed to, the one with the red roof and bricked-up windows. The guy paused for a second, looked at the other local guy nearby, and said something like, "That place isn't a bar." That got my attention. I asked what it was, and he shrugged, said no one really knew. He said it had been there for years, but he'd never seen it open or anyone go in or out. The other local chimed in, saying the same thing, that it had never been a bar, never had any sign, and if someone told us to go there, they were either messing with us or trying to get us into trouble. He said the building had a reputation. People in the area avoided it. Some said it was used by people running drugs through the back roads. Others thought it was a squat for criminals hiding out. A few believed even worse things like human trafficking or illegal gambling. Nobody had proof and nobody went near it to find out. He told us flat out that if we'd gone inside, we might not have come back out. I didn't say anything for a while after that. I just stood there with a dead branch in my hands, thinking about how close we'd come to getting out of the Jeep, about how we sat there for those few quiet minutes in front of the building, engine idling, both of us trying to pretend we weren't scared. If someone had been watching, if we'd knocked on that door, who knows what would have happened. The rest of the trip felt different after that. I didn't enjoy it as much. I kept thinking about how isolated we were, how far we were from cell service or help. Every time I heard movement in the woods, I wondered if someone had followed us, if maybe we'd been marked somehow. I couldn't shake the paranoia, even though I knew it was probably just animals or other campers. We left Sunday morning, packed up fast, and didn't stop anywhere on the way out. When we got back into a zone with service, I tried to look up the building using satellite view and street names. I found the spot on the map, but there was no label, no listing, just a structure in the woods next to a dirt pull-off. I searched forums, Reddit threads, local news, nothing. Like it didn't exist. That was a few years ago. I've been camping since then, but never in that area. I don't think I'll ever go back to North Georgia. Not the deep parts, anyway. And I never stop at backwoods bars anymore, even if they're marked. Because I learned something on that trip. Something I think about more often than I'd like to admit. There are places in this country that don't want to be found. Places that look like one thing but are really something else. And sometimes all it takes is a wrong turn or a casual question to find yourself standing right in front of one. We were lucky. We didn't knock. We didn't get out. We didn't push our luck. But the scariest part is how easy it would have been to do the opposite. One more minute of curiosity. One of us saying, Let's just see. And I might not be sitting here now writing this down. I still wonder who that cashier was, why she gave us those directions, if she knew what that place really was, if she thought we were someone else, or if she just wanted to see what we do. I'll never know, but I won't forget. Not the building, not the light bulb, not the silence, not the feeling of being watched without ever seeing a face, and definitely not how close we came to something we weren't meant to find. I've always been one of those people who enjoy being alone in the woods. It started when I was a teenager and my dad took me on my first camping trip. Just me, him, and the trees. Since then, it became something I do often. I liked the quiet, the peace, and not having to deal with people for a while. So, even as I got older and life got more stressful, I kept the habit going. Once or twice a year, I'd load up my backpack, grab a tent, some gear, and disappear into the woods for a few days. This story happened in early fall. The air was starting to cool down, the leaves were just beginning to turn, and the bugs weren't as bad. It was a perfect time to go out. I took a few days off work and drove a few hours north to a national forest I hadn't been to before. I did a bit of research, checked maps, printed a copy just in case, and planned a 3-day solo trip. Nothing crazy, just a loop trail that was supposed to be about 20 miles total, with a few primitive camping spots along the way. I brought enough food, water purification tablets, and all the usual gear. I parked at the trailhead around 9 a.m. and got going right away. The first few miles were quiet and uneventful. The trail was in good shape. The forest was beautiful, mostly hardwoods, and the trail went up and down through gentle hills. I passed a creek, some rock outcrops, a bunch of chipmunks and birds. I didn't see a single person all day, which was pretty normal for this time of year in this area. I hiked until late afternoon and found a flat clearing about a quarter mile off the trail, near a small stream. I set up my tent, filtered some water, cooked a small dinner, and sat on a log just listening to the woods as the light faded. It was one of those moments that made the whole trip worth it. Just peaceful. That night, I slept well. I didn't even wake up once. In the morning, I made some coffee, packed everything up, and continued on the loop trail. Again, no signs of people. It was around noon when I saw something strange, though. It wasn't anything huge at first, just a couple pieces of broken branches near the trail. Not like ones that had snapped from storms, either. These were snapped in weird ways, short and sharp, and sticking out at angles that didn't look natural. I figured maybe someone had come through on a horse or something, though the trail wasn't technically open to horses. Then I started noticing other things. Disturbed ground, footprints that didn't match mine. They were fresh too, just a little ahead of me. I could tell by how they compressed the dirt and by the lack of leaf litter in them. They looked like boot prints, but heavier than mine. At first, I figured someone else must be on the trail, but I hadn't seen any cars at the trailhead, and I hadn't passed any signs of campsites. Whoever it was, they weren't staying in the designated areas. By late afternoon, I found a strange spot off the trail. The trees opened up a bit into a narrow clearing, and I could see something glinting in the sunlight. I got closer and saw it was a piece of aluminum foil, crumpled and dirty. Beside it were a couple of food wrappers and a melted plastic bottle. It looked like someone had camped there and left in a hurry. No fire ring, no tarp, no real sign of organization. Just trash. The thing that stood out most, though, was the smell. It was faint but sour, like rotting meat or something that had been wet too long. It was hard to place, and I didn't want to dig through the trash to figure it out. I left the clearing quickly, uneasy. I hiked for another hour and tried to get as far away from it as I could. When I made camp that night, I picked a spot higher on a ridge and more hidden from the trail. I didn't cook, just ate a protein bar and drank some water. Something about that second day made me feel off. I couldn't shake the feeling someone was nearby. That night, I didn't sleep as well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard something. At one point, I was sure I heard footsteps, but they were distant and soft, maybe just a deer. Still, I kept my headlamp close and my knife within reach. The next morning, I broke camp quickly. I figured I'd finish the loop and get out early. I was about 6 or 7 miles from the car. I pushed hard that morning, barely stopping except to sip some water. The woods felt different, Still quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like the kind of quiet before a storm or after something bad happened. Probably sounds stupid, but the forest didn't feel like mine anymore. A few miles in, I came to a narrow section of trail that ran between two steep slopes. Felt like walking through a funnel. The trees here were thicker, closer to the trail, and there were more of those broken branches again, like someone had snapped them off on purpose, not randomly. That sour smell was back too, stronger this time. I slowed down, trying to listen, trying to see if anything was around. Then I saw it. Something had been dragged off the trail. There were deep marks in the dirt and leaves, like something heavy had been pulled downhill. I didn't follow it, but I could see just a bit of red further down the slope. Maybe an animal had been attacked by a predator, I told myself. Maybe a deer got hit by a bear or coyote. I didn't want to know for sure. I kept moving, but I was walking faster now. I kept checking behind me. At one point, I even stopped and waited just to listen. Nothing, just my own heartbeat and the wind in the trees. Then, about 2 miles from the trailhead, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a backpack, not mine. It was blue, torn open, lying halfway off the trail. I stopped and scanned the area, heart pounding. No one was around. The pack had some straps cut like someone had used a knife. Inside was a jacket, some rope, and a crushed water bottle. No ID, no phone, no wallet. The weirdest thing was that the dirt around it looked like someone had tried to cover it with leaves but gave up halfway through. I took a photo of it with my phone, just in case, then kept going. I didn't want to stick around and risk meeting whoever had left it there. That last mile was the worst. I felt completely exposed. Every sound made me jump. Every time the trail curved, I expected someone to be standing around the corner. When I finally saw my car in the lot, I almost ran. It was still the only vehicle there. I got inside, locked the doors, and didn't even take my boots off until I was 10 miles down the road. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported everything. The broken branches, the strange trash site, the backpack, the drag marks. They took me seriously. They asked me to show them on the map where everything was, and a couple of guys went out the next morning to check it out. A week later, I got a call. They didn't find a body, but they found more than one campsite like the one I described. Not official ones, just places where someone had clearly been staying long-term, hidden off-trail. Trash piles, bones from small animals, and a hunting knife stuck into a tree. They told me they were opening an investigation. A few weeks after that, the trail was closed to the public for maintenance. I kept checking the local news, but nothing ever came out about it. That trip shook me in a way no camping trip ever had. I haven't gone back to that forest. I still camp sometimes, but I'm a lot more careful now. I always let someone know exactly where I'm going. I stick to popular trails. And if I ever get that feeling again, that feeling that I'm not alone, I listen to it, because the woods are big and quiet, and not everything or everyone out there wants to be found.